Energy Storage Program, Bid Window 3, which was opened last year, March. This announcement will be made by the Minister of Electricity and Energy, Dr. Kgosientsho Ramokgopa, who is joined by Ms. Elsa Stradom, the interim head of the IPP office, and Ms. Lina Mangondo, the head of legal at the IPP office. Colleagues, without further ado, I wish to invite the Minister to the podium for the announcement.
Thank you very much, Tsakani, and good morning to everyone here present. Members of the media, once more, thank you very much for making it possible for us to communicate with the rest of the country. And good morning to everyone who's watching back at home. Of course, today we come to you to make an announcement on the preferred bidders for Bid Window 3 on the battery energy storage solutions. Again, this is another consequential moment in our path to ensure that we achieve energy security in our country. We did make the point previously that we're going to do everything possible to ensure that we achieve conditions of energy security in our country. And this is but one milestone that is going to help us to get closer to achieving that energy security. So what are we doing today? What the battery energy storage solution does is to help us to increase the grid capacity. So as many of you will know that we have already gone out to ensure that we were able to tamper with the mix of energy sources in the country, the ones that gets to be converted to give us the electricity that we need. We have on the grid coal, which is a big part of the generation capacity. We've got nuclear at Quebec. We've got hydro that we're importing from Mozambique, and then we have PV and also wind. So we know that, and then we also have the open cycle gas turbines where we burn a lot of diesel, and these are largely our peakers, Kgosientsho and Ankerleg, and the two IPPs, that is Avon and Didisa. And these are the peaking plants that help us to get through during periods of difficulty from a generation capacity. And they're the ones who sustained us also during peak periods when the generation capacity is not sufficient to help us to meet the demand. So what we are announcing today is really going to help us a great deal in ensuring that we've got additional capacity, especially during the peaks, to help us to meet the demand during the peak. So how is the configuration or the profile of demand? We know that we've got the peaks in the morning. So if you like, between 6 and 8:30 in the morning, and then that peak repeats itself around 5:30 to around 7:30 in the evening. And the evening peak is significantly greater than the morning peak. So what it means is that the significant amount of pressure that is placed on our generation capacity. And for us to meet this additional demand, if the grid is not performing at the right levels, then we run the open cycle gas turbines. But we know that during the day, demand is relatively lower than during the morning and the evening peak. But we also know that we're generating significantly more than what we are generating in the morning and evening peak. Where is that additional generation capacity coming from during the day? It really comes from our solar PV. We have relatively clear skies. The quality of the sun is such that we are able to generate more capacity. As you know, that we are generating over 7,000 megawatts from solar PV through our utility scale generation projects that have been contracted through the multiple bid windows that we have announced before. So essentially what it means during the day is that when we generate more than what we need, we continue with drawing the electricity from solar PV, and then we might bring down the generation capacity that we are getting from our own coal-fired power stations. So what we want to do is to ensure that we don't put to waste that excess generation capacity. And how are we going to achieve that? We're going to ensure that that excess generation capacity gets to be stored somewhere. And that storage is provided for through this technology called the battery energy storage solution. So what we are announcing today, if you come to think of it, is another peaker that is going to help us during the peak instead of relying more and more on the open cycle gas turbines on burning diesel. We are going to use that excess generation capacity that we generated during the day when the sun was out, cheap generation, we store it, and at the time when we need it, we are going to draw it from the batteries and be able to discharge and give us the kind of capacity that we need. So that's what we are doing today, just to say to the country that we are working on ensuring that we have additional generation capacity drawing from the technology that is out there in the world. So this is part of the totality of the efforts that we are making to ensure that the country is able to achieve energy security. And that's why I'm saying it's a consequential moment in that we are going to show that all the building blocks that are necessary for us to achieve energy security are now coming into place. And like I said, now we are announcing bid window number 3. So what do we know about this third battery energy storage program? We launched it in March of 2024. Of course, we had to go through an elaborate, transparent and competitive process, and that process is now culminating in us announcing who the preferred bidders are. Like I said before, the intention of this program is to ensure that we enhance the South African power system, and we are able to also provide essential ancillary services and increase grid capacity. We're increasing grid capacity because these storage solutions helps us to ensure that this excess generating capacity that we have during the day gets to be stored, and then we're able to draw on that solutions at the time when we need it, and this is typically during the peak periods. Of course, when we went out now, during bid window number 3, the capacity that we needed to procure is around 616 megawatts. And this capacity will be coming from various facilities across the country, and I'll mention where some of these substations are, where we are going to locate this additional capacity. We had identified through the National Transmission Company of South Africa that we need about 5 sites for us to be able to have this 616 megawatts of additional grid capacity, and all of this is located in the Free State. And then we are also were to appoint one preferred bidder per specific site. I must say that the response by the market has been overwhelming, and this communicates a number of messages. The first one is the credibility of the procurement process that we are running in the country, the multiple bid windows that we have run on PV and wind, and the 3 bid windows that we are running now on battery. Is just a confirmation that the market is confident about the credibility of our process. And I think we should be grateful to the IPP office for the exceptional work that they've been doing over the years since the inception of this program, not just of the battery storage, but the various bid windows that the IPP has been able to perform exceptionally well, enhancing the credibility of the program that we have started to roll out about a number of years ago, I think 2012 to be more precise. Like I said, the 3 bid windows on battery put together, the total capacity is about 1,744 megawatts. But today, like I said, we are contracting the last of the 1,744 megawatts, which is about 616 megawatts. We did a determination. We announced the procurement of 513 megawatts. That was bid window number 1. And then we went to bid window number 2. We announced preferred bidders to the tune of, in megawatt terms, about 615 megawatts. And today we are coming before the country to say we are announcing the preferred bidders for 616 megawatts. When you put all of this together, they amount to 1,744 megawatts, which is the ambition that we had stated in our integrated resource plan. And I'm happy to say we have delivered on the current version of the IRP. As many of you will know that the next iteration of the IRP is at advanced stage, is now sitting at NETLEC for the partners at NETLEC to make their own inputs, and coming out of that, we'll be able to size the capacity that we'll require for the next round of battery storage, and we'll then initiate the next round of bid windows. So I'm happy, and thanks to the IPP office, that we have delivered on the ambition that we stated for ourselves in the previous, in the IRP. And of course, the next IRP will then articulate what these bid windows are. So I'm happy to indicate that we have this preferred bidder status, and I'm happy to announce that these preferred bidders are going to be making a total investment of 9.5 billion rands into the South African economy, and more precise in the grid assets, increasing our grid capacity. As mentioned before, we went out to take out 5 sites, and I'm happy to indicate that for the site, the substation, that is Lienda, we have Scatec, who's a preferred developer. For Theseus, Everest, Harvard, and Merapi, we're happy to announce that Mulilo, which is a domestic outfit, has been identified as a preferred bidder. And I think what is significant about this round that we are announcing is that we are seeing that more and more South African companies are putting their hand up, and in fact, they are very competitive. Of course, like I said, we had 33 bidders that responded from across the globe. And what is exciting here is that a South African outfit has been in a position to win 4 of the 5 bids that we have put out. And I think it talks to maturity of the South African players, the developers, that in fact they are ranked amongst the best in the world. And I think it's exciting that in addition to the international players who are seeing that there's homegrown developers that are beginning to play a big role in this space, and it's something that we want to encourage going into the future. The expectation for commercial close of this project is January of 2026, and we're expecting the scheduled commercial operating date of this project to be January of 2028. And one of the things I say to the project developers, of course, we state what these timelines are, but I'm sure they can be a bit more ambitious and bring it much earlier than what we are announcing. But what we are contracting to is that the expectation is that the commercial operating date should be January of 2028, and then we'll have the benefit of this 616 megawatts of additional capacity. So we're beginning to green, if you like, the grid, and the battery is going to become a big part of that. It's going to enhance the value that we are getting from solar and wind, in that we are able to store those green electrons in the batteries, and this is part of our quest to ensure that we are able to transition. Like I said, and I always maintain the point that coal will continue to be the backbone of our generation capacity as we build the additional capacity that will come from cleaner sources of energy. I think it's important that we have an appreciation that we're talking of a mix of generating sources as opposed to pitting one against the other. So that's the geographic profile of the location of these projects. Like I said, the ones that we are announcing today are located in the Free State, and we have seen that bid window number 2, the ones that we had announced were in the Northwest, and then the first bid window, the ones that we announced were largely concentrated in the Northern Cape, and there was one that was in the Northwest. So you can see that there's a relatively good geographic spread of these assets, the increase of the grid capacity. Of course, this is consistent with the mapping by the National Transmission Company of South Africa. They are the ones who identify where these sites are so that we are able to get a significant, if you like, amount of returns from this investment, returns in the form of this storage capacity. They are the ones who will identify the substations, articulate the necessary ancillary assets that are required to support this rollout of battery storage. I mean, I must make the point that we are the most advanced on the continent, South Africa, in relation to battery storage solutions, the technology that we are advancing, and we want to remain to be at the cutting edge, lead the region, lead the continent, and compete with the rest of the world in relation to how we are able to migrate to cleaner forms of generation capacity, of course, generating rather solutions taking account of our own domestic circumstances. What are some of the provisions of this preferred bidder? Is that the power purchase agreement is for a period of 15 years, and this is consistent with what is international best practice. Of course, there are multiple matrices that we use for us to evaluate, if you like, the competitiveness of the bids that are before us. Like I said, it's an open and transparent process. And maybe just to say one or two things of how we are arrived at this, some of the considerations have to do with the bidder's proposed price. And then there's something that we call the rapid voltage change factor. This has to do with the relative position of this storage capacity to the substation. So one of the things that we're going to address going into the future to ensure that we compare apples with apples, we're sitting with the IPP office to ensure that we are the ones who procure the land close to where these substations are located, so that when we compare the bidders is one-to-one. So we don't want a bidder to be penalized because the location of the storage is a significant distance away from where this substation is, because they get to be penalized as a result of that. And the ones that are much closer, they have an advantage because they are closer, and of course there's lesser technical losses, and therefore they score higher in our bid evaluation. So what we want to do to ensure that we are able to level the floor, the playing field, is to ensure that before we go out, we are the ones who procure the sites next to this substation, so that we get to evaluate the bidders just on what is their proposed price. And then there's something called the round trip efficiency, and this has to do with if you like the storage efficiency of the batteries themselves. So we'll take so many megawatts to charge those batteries, and we expect to, in return, to have those megawatts out at the time when we need them, and typically this is during the peak periods. So if the batteries are not efficient, then you get to be penalized, because you must give us as much as we gave you to charge, to store that energy. We need it back when it is required into the grid, typically during the peak. We expect you to give us the same amount of electricity that we have given you. And of course, the storage capacity that we are looking at, it's batteries that have got a 4-hour discharge cycle. So if you come to think of it, we need it in the morning, we need it in the evening, 365 days a year, so we need this twice a day. So we have 365 days in a year, so multiply by 2, and that's how you get to this, this number that is about 730 charge or discharge cycles. So the 730 of these 4 hours that we need, and this coincides with the morning peak and the evening peak. And why the peaks? Like I said earlier on, at the peak period when the system is not performing and the demand is higher, we're relying on diesel. Diesel is very expensive. Now we're bringing cheaper solutions because we would have charged it using cheaper energy. And that means that over time, once we've got a bigger share of this battery storage, solar PV, we're able to bring down the price of electricity. Electricity becomes more and more affordable because when we burn diesel, it's very expensive. So look at this. When I say it's consequential, we are not just talking about the grid capacity expansion, but we are also talking to the issues about the rate of increase of the tariff. Once we draw from cheaper forms of energy, or once it gets converted into electricity, then we can be able to pass the price to benefit to the consumer. Our industries becomes more competitive. We are able to lend our goods cheaper on the domestic and international markets. We are able to expand the flow of manufacturing. We get people into employment. Households are not subjected to runaway price increases. So this is what we are doing. Like I always say, as we resolve the issues of generation, we must resolve the issues of price. And this is going to help us to address that situation. And I really must say that as a result of the maturity of this process, we're beginning to see that the price point is coming down. I mean, if you were to compare this with the previous bid windows, we're seeing decreases of about 40%, an 8% decrease in the average evaluation price compared to bid window number 1 and bid window number 2. And this is the point we always make. With the maturity of this program, investments that are made by technology developers, you are going to find that these solutions are going to be cheaper and cheaper, and the result is that households are not going to be overburdened with runaway tariff increases. Industry will be able to buy electricity that is cheaper, and they are able to lend their goods more competitively, well priced, and they are able to have a greater share of the market domestically and internationally. And this is how we are going to grow the South African economy. So what we're doing today, in addition to grid capacity, the affordability of electricity, it also talks to the economic narrative, the growth of the South African economy, for businesses to be competitive, especially those who rely on electricity for their production, where electricity is a big part of their input costs. Once we have a significant share of this battery, solar PV, of course, as part of the entirety of the solutions, we are able to bring down the cost, and then businesses are able to thrive. The South African economy gets a lift. One of the things that is a requirement is a need for us to ensure that these interventions result in a qualitative transformation of the South African economy. So there must be a substantial, if you like, a change in the South African economy. The issues around ownership and participation, and I am happy to indicate that bidders will contract at a minimum of 40% of black shareholding. I think it's important that we are able to bring more and more players domestically. Mulilo has done that. More and more players from the previously disadvantaged communities, so we're talking black, and of course we must go to an area of women and youth to participate, and this is how we are able to ensure that we leave no one behind. We take it a bit further, because the shareholding, really you get your returns over a period of time, because you have to pay the debts that we have. A lot of this money, the capital that will be injected here, it's a combination of equity and debt. They have to repay the debt. The returns, they'll see them much, much later. But what gets to be seen much earlier is during the period of construction. So these companies have also agreed that they up to 30% shareholding by construction contractors. So the money that is made immediately when you build these programs, 30%, a minimum of that, will ensure that will go to players that are black, and 42% of operations for contractors. And then the solution on battery really, unfortunately, because of the nature of the technology, it doesn't give you massive employment opportunities. And that's why we're talking 852 job opportunities. That's not significant. So really the impact is not on the job numbers, and I'm not understating 852 jobs. These are people who never had jobs yesterday. When we start construction, they'll have jobs. But the major intervention is on the grid capacity expansion, the cost of electricity over time, and the fact that we are greening energy generation in our country. The commitment to local content, 3.7 billion rands, just adds to about 240 billion rands or so that is already in the South African economy as a result of previous bid windows, solar PV, wind, and the two bid windows on battery. So we can see that South Africa is becoming to be a magnet for investments, international investment, domestic liquidity is finding expression in the South African market. And this is how we are going to turbocharge the South African economy. Of course, what we are announcing now, it's on a small scale, but it's an accumulation of all of these investments that is going to make it possible for us to ensure that we lift the South African economy, and the Minister of Finance doesn't have the difficulties of where am I going to get this additional revenue to finance the expenditure, because the South African economy will be on a good path. Like I've made the point, 1.3 billion of this 3.7 billion will be on black enterprise procurement, 1.1 billion on broad-based black economic procurement, and then also identifying qualified small enterprises that will participate in this space. And of course, I mean, we haven't had the kind of benefit or returns that we would have wanted to have from the previous bid windows. This is an area that requires improvement, and it really sits with us, the policymakers, and also the IPP office as an enabler of this program. We need to revise this to ensure that there's significant investments in the South African economy. And then there are other issues that have to do with supplier development, skills development, sponsoring kids to go to school, university, so that we're able to build a broad pool of skills that is going to support the South African economy. So you can see that these social returns are vast. Of course, this is just a 3.7 billion investment, but the point we're making, just on the local content alone, but the investments are, by any measure, significant. We can't be dismissive and understating the 3.7 billion of local content. And then we are working on an area. So what are some of the lessons going forward? We need to ensure, like I said, increase the share of inverter-based renewable energy in South Africa. So what we want to do in the next bid windows, we want to introduce a technology that allows us to ensure that embedded in when we go out for call for the next round of bid windows, we need to have what we call bid forming technologies. So what were grid forming technologies? This is to help us to ensure that we build the necessary inertia. By inertia, I mean the ability of the grid to respond in time to sudden changes in frequency. The nature of solar and PV is that they are intermittent, they are non-dispatchable, they come as and when the weather allows, but demand doesn't work that way. Demand is consistent, it must be satisfied all the time. When there are sudden changes, this can interrupt the grid, can threaten the stability of the grid. Now we're going to embed in the next round what we call grid forming technologies to allow us to ensure that the grid is foolproof of any sudden changes, and we obviate a situation where we're likely going to have grid collapse as a result of the lack of inertia. You can see now we are moving rapidly. We'll get to a point where more than 30% of the aggregate of generation capacity will be coming from renewables. As I stand before you, it's about 24% of what we generate is coming from renewables. And the science has taught us that once you breach the 30% mark of the share of renewables in your grid, you are susceptible to a grid collapse. And we have seen it in other parts of the world. So in order to ensure that we continue on this path of onboarding new generation capacity coming from renewables, we need to introduce new technologies around what we call grid forming technologies. And that's what we are going to embed in this next cycle. And this is also going to help us. It's going to support black start operations. Black start simply means that if the country were to go dark, you need somewhere to restart the electricity in generation. So these grid forming technologies are going to help us significantly to ensure that they support any unlikely event of a black start. So this is the point that we are making going into the future. And then there are lessons that we have learned, and we continue to learn these lessons when we move from one bid window to the other. The first one that it could be a question that you'll ask is the risk of concentration. Of course, Mulilo, a big winner, the bid window number 2, again now bid window number 3, a local outfit, don't doubt their credentials, but this is life. If something were to happen and there's challenges in arriving at financial close, it might put the program under significant risk. Of course, when the team engage with Mulilo, we think that we should be in a position to obviate that. But when you generate scenario, also generate the worst case scenario. So one of the things that we need to have a conversation on is around making sure that there's no over-concentration, but still making it possible for companies to bid. I mean, you can't penalize someone for being competitive. So it's around balancing those. And then the second one is around black participation. What we have seen outside the bid with this bid window is that there will be 1 or 2 outfits that will be present as black shareholders in some of the successful preferred bidders. So we want to have a conversation ourselves as policymakers to ensure that those who have benefited as black shareholders in the previous bid windows, they get to stand on their own, they get to bid and be in the higher league of those who are bidding as developers, so that we create room for new entrants. We want to ensure that we broaden the floor. There's more and more black entrants that must come into the space. So you don't want a black player to be omnipresent. It's with this developer, with that developer, and the third developer. So they win, irrespective of which developer wins, because they are present, they are a partner in all of this. So we're going to ensure that we eliminate that situation and make sure that we democratize or broaden the floor of those who are going to participate. And then the last point I want to make is reiterate the point I made earlier on the bid windows with regards to battery. The National Transmission Company identified the ideal sites. So we want, as government, to procure that land so that when the bidders come, they come on an equal basis. So they come on the land that the state would have already procured, so that the competition is on price and other elements other than your proximity to the substations, and you find that the others are penalized as a result of that. But having said the above, I really want to say that we want to congratulate SCATEC, we want to congratulate Mulilo. It's an exceptionally good story about the South African, the maturity of the South African energy complex, in that now we have homegrown players who are on their own right beginning to participate, and you can see that bid window number 2 and now bid window number 3, a major player in that. So congratulations to Mulilo, and we hope that you will continue to participate in the next round. SCATEC and the rest of those who had submitted the bids, like I said, almost oversubscribed. 33 bidders made this, went and responded to this call. and this is testimony to the work that the IPP office is doing. And like I said to the country, this is part of our quest to ensure that we achieve energy security, one. Secondly, is to ensure that we bring down the cost of electricity, because these solutions have been shown to be the most cost competitive of the energy solutions that you can have. A combination of solar, BPV, and wind, and now storage capacity. It means that we are flattening, if you like, the cost curve of electricity, will make households' lives more bearable, more disposable income, and more significantly for industry. Once we bring the price down, it means that their finished products, especially for those who the electricity is a big input cost, becomes more competitive domestically, internationally. You are able to expand capacity utilization. You are even able to add more employees so that we get the South African economy going. Electricity is a backbone of any economy, and as we have mentioned before, if the lights are off, there is no economy. It means that the National Revenue Fund is shrinking. Minister Godongwan doesn't have the right, the amount of revenue that is required to meet the expenditure. We can't support the poor. So I think it's important that we understand this intervention as part of a mix. We are supporting the South African growth story. And South Africa's growth will be achieved when we have energy security. We resolve the challenges on the logistics side. Once more, thank you very much, Staka.
Thank you very much, Minister, for the detailed announcement and the very informative context. Colleagues, the Minister and the panel are at your disposal for any further clarity that you may seek or any questions that you may have. So with that, we are opening the floor to questions. We are inviting our colleagues who are also following us online to share their questions. We'll take them through Takalani after this, after colleagues in the room. Antoinette, are there any other hands? Okay, you can go ahead, Antoinette.
Good morning, Antoinette Stubbert. I'm a freelance energy writer. I would like to know what the differential is in cost between the OCGT and the battery storage, where they are alternatives to each other, and also whether it's a one-on-one comparison. In other words, with 616 megawatt of battery storage replace 616 megawatt of OCGT generation. And then I would also like to know whether there are more battery storage bid windows planned in the immediate future.
Thank you. Just checking one last time if we've got any hands in the room before we take Takalani and the online questions. Okay, Takalani.
Okay, I'll be taking the online questions.
Okay.
We have two questions from Lanisa Magia representing Ministry 4. What are the cost trends of this bid window compared to the two others? Have they come down? Second question from Lanisa is why is the timeline for financial close only 8 months from now? Is it based on the past trends where renewable energy projects could not reach financial close within a 6-month period? We have 4 questions from Terence Freeman. First question from Terence is, what battery technologies will be deployed at the testing site? Question number 2, what is the overall investment values across the 3 rounds? Third question from Terence is, what ancillary services will these batteries provide? Last question, can you give an update on the status of the project that prevailed under bid window 1 and 2?
Thank you. Are those all the questions for this round? Before we get responses, going once, twice, thanks, colleagues, we'll get responses.
Good morning, everyone. Let me attempt to answer some of those questions. I think, Antoinette, with regard to your first question on the OCGT and the battery storage,
I think one needs to see them as complementary to each other. Obviously, they're different. They have different cost drivers. OCGT with the diesel fuel-based as it currently is compared to technology such as battery storage. And that also linked to the question on what is the technologies. It's basically lithium-ion batteries that the technology is that will be part of this, or has also been part of the past 3 base battery storage rounds. With regard to the cost drivers and the cost trends, yes, we have seen, similar to what we've also seen previously in renewables, we've seen the downward trend also as based on technology developments, but also as the market becomes confident with the process. So from bid window 1 to bid window 3, we've seen a 40% decrease in the capital cost recovery charge rates and evaluation prices. And then between bid window 2 and bid window 3, it was 8%. Both bid window 2 and bid window 3 was issued in 2024, whereas the previous one was earlier. So you actually do see that downward trend as the technology matures, etc. The investment across the 3 programs exceeds 30 billion rand of investment, and it just goes to show as to the efficiencies that comes with that. Bid window 1, I think, was slightly more expensive in terms of the total investment because of the time that it came and it being the first, whereas now, as we've noted, 9.5 billion for over 616 megawatts. I don't know if I've covered anyone. Is there a question that I missed? Okay, financial close in 8 months. Yes, I think the financial close question, maybe let me start with battery as the first round of the battery storage. We've got 4 projects that's already in operation, so we have 1 that is still outstanding, and we anticipate to close it still in the next month. That will deal with bid window 1. For bid window 2, we are also progressing with the activities for commercial close and financial close, and anticipating that would all be concluded also by the latest early next year. And then for this particular round, we will now start the process, and that process, from our experience to date, can take between 6 to 8 months. Sometimes there are matters particular to particular projects that could impact that. But I think also to echo what Minister said earlier, we will always strive to make that shorter, to move and to condense that process to ensure that these projects can go into construction as soon as possible. Yes, I think the ancillary services associated with this program, maybe I need some assistance on that, and we will have to come back to you, but we'll be able to provide you with those details. Sorry?
Further bid windows?
The further bid windows, specifically for battery storage, bid window 3 concludes the determination under the 2019 IRP. So further bid windows specifically for battery storage will take its cue from what comes from the IRP, as also indicated by the Minister. The 2025 IRP, yes.
Thank you very much, Elsa. So Elsa has covered most of those questions, and as indicated, other follow-up questions, both online and in the room. Okay, it looks like we don't have any other questions. I'd like to hand over to the Minister just for the closing. And thank you, colleagues, for your attendance. Without further questions, it marks the end of our briefing after the Minister's closing remarks. Thanks.
No, just a brief one to Antoinette's question. You are right, the RP 2025 will express itself on the size of battery storage that is envisaged. Now we have exhausted what was in the IRP 19,1744 to be more precise. We are seeing, as indicated, that the price points are coming down, so the case for battery storage, solar, PV, and wind is even much stronger going into the future. That process is at NEDLEC. The indication is that we're likely going to have the NEDLEC process completed, I think, by June. And once that is completed, then we go to cabinet. We have done all the processes. As you remember, we don't want to rush NEDLEC. They have a right to take their time, consider what is before them. They'll make that input. To the extent that we can accommodate that input, we will accommodate that input, go to cabinet. So we're envisaging that by end of July, we should have the IRP 25 out, and that will then inform the next bid windows, more specifically on battery, and then on the rest of the complexion of the energy sources that will power the South African economy. Once more, thank you very much for making time and joining us. Friday, wish you well for the remainder of the week, and pleasant weekend. Thank you.
Maybe they might say no.